everybody. How we doing today? It's a Tuesday, August 2021. Today I want to talk to you about another rare record that few people know about that's absolutely a favorite of mine. And I've only had it for about 6 months, but it's that good. However, first of all, I thought it'd be fun for me to share with you some memories of some of my favorite record buying missions, record stores, places to shop. And I think I'll just intersperse them through my next couple episodes. But I have to start with my best record buying experience of my life. And I've had some great trips buying records. You know, it's something I like to do. When I travel with my wife or my family, I'll find little thrift shops, pawn shops, record stores. And I've made some great trips where I came back with a crate or a crate and a half or 2 crates of great scores, rare stuff, stuff that was in a smaller town or afford. Like it's always surprises. But it would be really hard to top my greatest record buying experience. And it's from 2005. It was the fall, probably mid-September. And my friend who I was living with at the time, Brian Big Bird Canfield, had a timeshare that his parents offered him to stay in the Catskills in New York. It was late season, obviously, so most people had already gone back to the city, New York City. The Catskills are the great resort area for the New York City area between the wars. And then after the wars, the train gets people down to Atlantic City. There's flights down to Miami. So the Catskills kind of become more of a regional thing and much more of a Jewish Upper New York East Side, going to the Jewish cabins and lake resorts in the Catskill region. The Catskills are a couple hours out of New York. You have to take the Tappan Zee Bridge across the Tappan Zee, and then you go up into these old mountain ranges that are really eroded. They're probably part of the Appalachians to some degree. The Adirondacks are further up north. We were staying not that far from Callicoon, I think in a place called Jeffersonville. We had a little resort there. So, that being said, Big Bird asked me if I wanted to go with him. You know, my parents got a timeshare. They're not going to be there for a week. We can stay ourselves for a week. And I'm always kind of up for a trip, especially in those days, my younger days. I loved to travel. I loved road trips. I still do. My wife's not such a fan of road trips, but I love a road trip. So we jumped in his truck. We're out there kind of last minute, really. And we drove out to New York. And I told him on the way, I'm like, well, not even the way, before we left. I'm like, I'm happy. Sorry, they're around. I'm memory my phone. But I told him I'd be happy to go with him. But I already had a collection of probably 4,000 or 5,000 records. I was just starting in 05 to get a following as a DJ. So I'm like, I want to look for funk, R&B, soul records out east when we go out east. And he's like, that's absolutely fine. You know, we didn't have much of an agenda. We had the timeshare, and then I wanted to stop in all the cities we went through and record shop. And we kind of skipped Chicago, in part because I'm really familiar with Chicago. I shop there all the time. It's my second greatest shopping experience is the city of Chicago. I've gone there and come back with 2 crates a dozen times. Like, it's an amazing place to shop. And one of the cool things is Reckless Records, who has 3 locations. They mark stuff down rather rapidly that doesn't sell. And so you can actually find rare jazz titles that no one knows about for $2, $3, $4 because they sat there for 6 months. Instead of just sitting there at what they started at 29, they keep getting marked down. I love Reckless Records. Dusty Groove is great. Chicago as well. So the Jazz Record Mart was always a fantastic experience. So Chicago's a legend of its own. But we skipped Chicago on this trip. And we had to make it to his parents' place in Akron the first day. So I think we stopped in Toledo. We went through Minneapolis, Milwaukee, Chicago, across northern Indiana, into Ohio, into Toledo. We shopped there and had dinner. A little record store I found had some good soul records, good prices. and mid-Sound American Rust Belt cities have a lot of great black records that had a big black population between the wars, after the war. They're the people who bought a lot of those great soul, funk, even jazz, blues records. A city like Toledo is great because the rents aren't so high that the record store has to charge huge numbers. So I actually got some great records at this little store in Toledo. We got back on the road, drove to Cleveland, spent a little time in Cleveland, then went south to Akron, which is like 40 minutes south of Cleveland, where his parents stayed. And we switched cars then. We took his mom's car. We had a big truck, the first leg of the journey. So we left Akron the next morning for this timeshare. And we drove across the northern chunk of Pennsylvania. And it's pretty mountainous, actually. Appalachia, Pittsburgh south of you. And you get into the middle of the state, past Harrisburg, which is also south. And then you finally get into the far eastern part. You start getting towards Scranton, Wilkes-Barre. And then we kind of shot up into the Poconos, and then we crossed the Delaware River, and we finally found our timeshare in the Catskills. And while in the Catskills, we went to a number of thrift stores and just antique marts that had some really cool records. And again, the population of those areas was so much greater in those days, but they're also more scoured over, so it's a couple double-edged sword. We went to this flea market in Callicoon, and I found some cool old Shalimar and some old disco stuff, and a Slave record I was looking for a long time. So it was like almost every day we did some record shopping. And my buddy Big Bird wasn't really a record shopper, but he was always just kind of game. I came with him. It was fun, So we spent a couple days in the timeshare. I think on day 3 we decided to make a New York City trip, and it required us having to drive down the Catskills, across the Tappan Zee. We stayed. We dropped our car parked in right on the other side of the Tappan Zee. What's that city called? I can't think of it right now. Blanking out. We took the train down along the Hudson into the Grand Central Station, and we pretty much walked Midtown. We did the Central Park thing. We saw the great hotels, the Pierre, the what's the great one on the corner there? I'm drawing a blank right now. The Waldorf Astoria, the Plaza, all those great hotels along the park. We kind of walked around there, saw the horses and carriages, walked to the park some. We walked 42nd Street, 5th Avenue. We walked by Carnegie Hall, got greasy pizzas all over us. We actually did New York Central Library, which is an incredible building. And I'm also a big architecture guy. I love old Beaux Art and Art Deco design. It's beautiful. It was this flamboyant, decorative architecture that was a shout back to the classics, and it had a staying power, and it had a kind of an announcing our arrival on the stage. All those great 1915, 1920s, 1930s buildings had this fantastic stature to them that was very much a measuring stick of my machismo, my male testosterone, my shaft thrusting into the sky kind of thing. From the Woolworth Building to the Chrysler Building to the Rockefeller Center, the Great Empire State Building, all the great buildings in southern Manhattan. I'm a big fan of all that. So I was soaking New York in, and the New York Central Library is just a fantastic building with gorgeous finishing touches and quality building materials. And my dad, who did a lot of finished carpentry, often claimed how today's buildings, you can't find the people to even do that type of work, let alone what it would cost to pay them. But a lot of these people were immigrant workers coming across, working for dollars on the dimes on the dollar, just getting not paid hardly anything to do this incredible work. So we soaked in Midtown the first time, and then we had to go back to our timeshare for a couple more days. I didn't shop in the first time because I didn't want to spend too much money in the first week and a half of my trip. We were gone almost 3 weeks. So a few more days go by in the timeshare. We're hanging out regionally. We're doing some eating, some barbecuing, some swimming. We hit up a few more flea markets locally in that area, pawn shops. Didn't find a lot. But then we decided to head to Boston and then go back to New York. And so we crossed across the Hudson again at Tarrytown. where the Tappan Zee is, and we zoomed across the center of Massachusetts, and Connecticut and Massachusetts aren't big states. We zoomed across the top, right through the center of Massachusetts, through Springfield, I think it is, and into Boston. And we shopped in Boston, parked a car, and we went down to Fenway Park. And there was some great record stores in Boston. The prices were fair. I remember I found my Herbie Hancock taken off there. I found a lot of cool Blue Notes actually in this one record store in Cambridge. Sadly, I'm not going to be able to remember the names of most record stores. It's been 17 years since this happened. But I already had 4,000 or 5,000 records. And I came home probably with 150 records from this trip. You know, the back of the pickup truck, we had a few big boxes. Boston was fun. We went up to Gloucester, up on the Atlantic coast, and the water was frigid. The beaches were empty in late September, mid-September. Even though it was a nice day, 75, the water was, it was freezing cold. We went back to Boston, had some Chinese food in that great little Chinatown area. You know, we spent a couple of days in Boston, actually. I hit a number of record stores. I found a number of great jazz records in Boston, you know, and I wish I knew what I knew now about jazz when I made this trip, because I'm sure I passed up a lot of great stuff. So after our time in Boston, we head south to Providence. My friend was eating lobster every day, and I'm not an ocean insect eater. I don't eat that stuff, man. I'm a Canadian farm boy. I'm raised on beef. You know, cows and chicken was exotic in our home. You know, we had ground beef 5 days a week in our house. A steak was a luxury, and we didn't really eat that much pork. We didn't really eat that much chicken. Chicken was like maybe 2 or 3 times a month we had chicken. It was pretty much a ground beef diet in our home. My parents were great parents. Times were tough at times, but it's just they were Dutch and English immigrants, so they didn't have sophisticated food palates. Boiled potatoes and green beans, almonds and apples were exotic to my dad's Dutch palate. You know, let's get some almonds going and some pastries and some apple torts and whatever you have. But we didn't do spicy. There was no peppers in our home the whole time. As a child, I never saw a green pepper. You know, that was very foreign to me. Spice was non-existent. Everything was done medium well to well. But anyway, my friend was eating lobster left and right. We stopped in Providence, hit some record stores there. I think it just one. Then went down to this great beach on the Channel between Long Island and Connecticut. It's called Long Island Sound, and there's a lot of great beaches along that stretch of water. We went to a beach called Musquamacut. It's kind of on the Connecticut-Rhode Island border, and the beach was fantastic. Just miles of white sand, sailboats off in the distance, and even some bigger traffic from the Sound's part of the ocean, obviously, but because it's a sheltered inlet that connects to Long Island, separates from the ocean, the water was probably 15 degrees warmer than it was in Gloucester the day before, and you could swim easily in Musquamacut. We got back in our cars after half a day on the beach, and we drove through like New London and New Haven, Bridgeport, and crossed Bronx on the Cross Bronx Expressway, crossed the George Washington Bridge into New Jersey, and we drove down towards East Brunswick, where we had a hotel booked. And we stayed in East Brunswick for a couple nights, and we took the train every day from New Jersey into New York, to Manhattan. And this is when I really dove into the record stores of the Village. And Bleecker Street, that whole area, there was record stores everywhere. And Bleecker Bob's, of course, was still in existence, and there had to be 6 to 8 stores, maybe 10 stores within a few block radius that you couldn't really fathom. Everywhere you looked, like, oh, there's records, you know. And my most memorable one, and again, the thing about New York was the prices were astronomical. You know, the rents are so much higher in New York, space is so much more limited in New York. To hold vinyl takes space. So records were all 2 to 3 times more expensive in New York than any other place we stopped on this trip. That being said, the amount of great vinyl available in New York was insane. And this was 2005, so the vinyl renaissance hadn't really been taking place yet. It's starting to become more common than it was in the mid to late 90s. It's starting to remake a resurgence, so it's starting to become available again. But the prices were just crazy. But we're in the Great Village area, you know, the big red building with the white lines in it, you know, the whole East Village, West Village. It's just a fantastic beatnik hipster area. A lot of artist lofts and great music places and bars and food and Jewish and Italian delis, which you don't really get those in the Midwest. Chicago, yeah, but when you get into Minneapolis, everything becomes whiteified. All your even your ethnic delis have kind of lost some of that real ethnicity. So to take in a real Italian deli or a real Jewish deli and see what a real bagel is like or a real shoyadel is like, it was absolutely fantastic. Uh, we ate really well, let's just say, and I was watching The Sopranos a lot at that time, and so I was curious about a lot of the foods I had heard about in Sopranos. So I was like, just soaking that stuff in. Uh, so in the village, I kind of let go and spent some money this time. Probably dropped $500-600, which in those days was a lot on records. And there was one place in particular where I was upstairs. It was a small space, high vaulted ceilings, but it was very narrow. Everything was kind of like ready to fall over on you, it felt like. And I'm looking for some old funk records, Slave, Pleasure, Zap, Cameo, the late 70s stuff from them. Just kind of tougher to find funk soul records. It didn't really make it to Minneapolis. Zap, a lot of that great funk stuff that wasn't really disco, it was more black. And after disco kind of was driven out of the charts by the anti-disco movement, there's a whole era of R&B that happens that whites are very disconnected from. White folks will dance to all the big disco hits because they know those. But from 1980 to 1984, there's all this great R&B that happens. SOS Band, Take Your Time, Do It Right. White folks don't know that stuff unless they go dancing. It was really, it took Michael and Prince and MTV to bring R&B back to white people. And you can play a lot of that stuff from that era, and white folks just don't know it. Just a touch of love, just a little bit. They don't know it. A gal who dates black men knows those songs, but it was a whole untapped section of R&B that was new to me. I was digging through Shalimar, all these great groups. And this guy said, "Oh, I don't have those up here, but if you let me go down in the basement, if you hold on until the customers leave, I'll take you down there." And I'm like, "What's down there?" Usually for me, basements, I'm thinking, this is the 50 Cent stuff, and lo and behold, we went down to this vaulted basement thing that you had to go outside, down, open, unlock the door, go in, and literally he went to the walls and he started pulling out 5-6 copies of each record I was looking for, and he had multiple copies of all of them, just walls of all these great funk records that were unattainable in the Midwest, and he had 5, 6, 10 copies of all of them. It was insane, and he wanted $20-25 for all of them, which in Minneapolis, those records would have been $5-6 for at that point. And he was cool and bundled some stuff together with me, and I think I got, the price down to about $15-18 per LP, but they were still expensive. But I walked out of there with some gold. And interesting enough, that kind of investment into my collection is part of what I feel led me to getting one of my great gigs in my DJ career, where I played at this place called Triggs for old black folks for 5-6 years. A lot of that stuff was the centerpiece of my sets. So you have to kind of invest in yourself at times and believe in what you're doing. And sometimes you don't even know you're doing it. You just do it. And if you follow a path, there will be a destination eventually. So I enjoyed that time in the village. It was a special time. The jazz records in New York were so expensive even then. I saw some cool stuff on the walls. Blue Note stuff, Prestige stuff, just cool 10 inches. But even in those days, the jazz records on the walls were hundreds of dollars. That would have been a third of that pretty much anywhere else. So the pricing in New York was really what kind of... And what's crazy is that even with that pricing, those record stores have all been driven out of business by the gentrification of New York City. Manhattan's become so unaffordable to any mom and pop business. It's not a place for any startup to start up that's in a small kind of family scale tradition. Even the big chains have a hard time keeping some places open in Manhattan. But it was an incredible experience. And we went back to our hotel room in New Jersey, went back the next day, did some more shopping and sightseeing, went down to the downtown area. Fantastic trip. And then we had left New Jersey the third day. This is probably 2.5 weeks into our trip. Went down to Philadelphia for the day. There's some great record stores right on Broad Street, right near that big park downtown. I felt like the whole city was under construction, just like Boston was with the Big Dig. Just crazy construction everywhere. But the Philadelphia has that old, beautiful Beaux Art architecture everywhere. Of course, they have the new Liberty plazas that have been up 10 years at that point. Found some great records in Philadelphia. And again, the prices now were 60% less than New York. It was shocking, the gulf. Then we made that long drive across the interstate of southern Pennsylvania to Pittsburgh. And Pittsburgh's kind of down in the valley. And we did some shopping in Pittsburgh again, had some great steaks at a great Pittsburgh steakhouse. Drove back to Akron, Ohio, where his parents lived and we stayed. We picked up his truck, and then we drove back home. Almost broke, but with a boatload of records. So that's one of my funnest record buying experiences. I learned a lot. I soaked in a lot of architecture, geography, just, some life on the road a little bit, some time up in the Catskills, the big black skies at night because you're out of there's no light pollution anywhere. But bought a lot of great stuff. A lot of it's become staples in my sets the last 12 years, 15 years. That being said, I'm going to cover now what I think is one of the great records that few people know about that I absolutely love. And it's a record I've talked about at least twice on the channel. Back 6-8 months ago when I got it, I was so excited. It's on the Argo label. And those of you who know Argo know that in that first 100 Argo records, there's probably 40 of them that most people don't know about. And some of them are better than others. Most of it's pretty solid, if not outstanding stuff. But this is the Pinky Winters record. And when I tried to find this for 2 years, trying to complete my Argo discography, there wasn't even one to bid on for 2 years. And there was a copy of this repressing in Japan that was like $80 plus shipping for a Fresh Sounds pressing. And I wasn't going to do that. If I'm going to pay that much for a pressing, it better at least be an original pressing. But I looked at Pop Psych and a few other places, and this original pressing would go for $600 to $1,500. It was expensive. So I was really discouraged. Like, I'm never going to get that Pinky Winters record. And I didn't know how good it was either. That was part of the issue. And when I finally got it, I'm like, this is outstanding. I believe Howard Roberts is on this, the guitar player, who is absolutely outstanding from the Wrecking Crew. Gerald Wiggins is on the piano, who's a great West Coast piano player. Big fan of Jim Wolf is on the bass. Chico Hamilton's on the drums, with Howard Roberts on the guitar. Absolutely beautiful. She's a white gal, Pinky. She sings with a lot of blues, a wonderful amount of soul. It's just fantastic. Wiggins is perfect comping behind her. Reminds me somewhat of Rawls, how he would comp behind Billie Holiday. So I finally found one. I believe it was in Italy or somewhere, Austria perhaps, and I got it for $50, including shipping. And it came to me. I listened to it, like, wow, this is so much better than I thought. It was just outstanding. And then literally 2 weeks later, Discogs alerted me that one had showed up on Discogs of the original pressing. And it was in Chicago, which is of course where Argo's from, and it was graded as being poor. And they wanted like $100 for it or $120 for it. And I messaged them quickly. I'm like, if the condition's that bad, I'll offer you $60 for it. And I ended up getting it with shipping, I think, for $70. And it's actually pristine. Whoever graded it just probably one glanced it and said, you know what, I don't know what this is. I'm gonna throw it online, and I got it. It plays without a hic. Hardly even any surface noise. It's, again, a beautiful cover, and it's one of my favorite vocal blues records of this era. She's just beautiful. It's elegant. It's luxurious. It's sincere. It's perfect. And she's not like the Bob Dorough record where she's a vocalist in that sense. She's much more of a traditional blues singer. And a lot of her other material is also pretty rare and hard to find and expensive. You can see on eBay right now a few $1,000 Pinky Winters records, and they're not even that one. There are others. There's one on a 10-inch and a couple other ones from the early era, but again, no one knows about Pinky Winters, and it's a record that if you see, buy it. It's the kind of jazz you'll never really get sick of. Again, it's Cocoa by the Fire. It's got a luxurious.
Like the scent of sweet spring flowers.
It's what you look for without realizing you're looking for it. And this type of jazz isn't as easy to find as you think. Wonderful. It's easy living. And so that wraps up this episode for today. Got some fun content coming. We're going to continue talking about rare records that are hard to find that are really awesome. I think it's an interesting topic. Hopefully people will watch it. We'll see. So y'all be safe. We'll talk to you all soon. Jazz Shepherd appreciates you. Check out my merchandise store if you want to grab a t-shirt to help support the channel, the coffee shop. We're making progress. Health inspector, we're waiting to hear back some information from them. We set our application off. So y'all let you know as things go forward. Y'all be safe. We'll talk to y'all soon. Peace.